Okay, I'll go ahead and begin. This will be a shorter presentation. I'll be walking through the stock projections for the next 3 years and the harvest decision table. So as we've done in the past, the projections and harvest decision table for 2026 through 2028 include the projection of a constant TCEY for the next 3 years. To make these projections, we implement all of the various catch sharing plans and agreements that are in place, and we use the 3-year average non-directed discard mortality to project into the future. Per the questions earlier today, we also, for items like subsistence harvest and unguided recreational harvest, we use the previous year's values to project forward. We include a range of mortality levels. These are going to go from no fishing all the way up to the maximum sustainable fishing yield, maximum sustainable yield proxy of F35%, with a range of options in between. We'll have the status quo plus or minus 5%, the 3-year surplus production, which I'll explain when I get there, the reference level, and an MEY proxy of F40%. For each of these various levels of projected harvest, we'll then calculate a range of different risk metrics, including stock decline dropping below our stock reference points, probability of fishery decline exceeding the reference level of F43% in either 1 or 3 years. So in order to read the decision table, and I see, sorry, we've got a little loss in translation here and converting these slides into Adobe, but the point of this slide is just to orient you on the decision table. Across the top of the table, we have yields ranging from low to high, from left to right. Along the left side, we have the various risk metrics, and in the middle of the table, we have the estimated risks. And rather than go through a whole series of numbers, what I'm going to do is walk through projections. I'll take a column out of the table and show you what that projection looks like visually and step through some of the associated risks. So from left to right across the table, the first column is no fishing mortality. We include this projection in order to understand what the level of productivity is in the stock and how fast could the stock increase if we weren't fishing on it at all. So this would correspond to a TCEY of 0 or an SPR of 100%. Meaning we're not fishing on the stock whatsoever, no fishing mortality. To orient you to the figure, it's the same estimated spawning biomass time series that I showed you in the stock assessment presentation earlier. The only difference here is at the end, we now have a 3-year projection highlighted in purple, along with the associated uncertainty in that projection. And you can see for no fishing mortality that we would estimate that the stock would be increasing. However, given the year classes that are in the water right now, over the next 3 years, at best, we could only get back to about where we were in 2016. Now, for each of these projections, I'm going to provide the same set of 5 different risks. From top to bottom, these are the risks of spawning biomass decline in 1 year or through 2027. And in this case, that's less than 1%. So we're pretty sure that the stock would increase if we weren't fishing at all. The second risk will be the probability of spawning biomass decline in over 3 years or through 2029. And again, that's less than 1% or 1 out of 100. The third risk reported is the probability of dropping below our SB 30% reference point. And that's over a 1-year time horizon through 2027. And in this case, we still have a 24% chance or a 24 out of 100 chance that we could drop below our B30% reference point in 1 year. And you might wonder, well, how can that be the case? Well, we already have a probability of being below that reference point right now as of the beginning of 2026. And so we're going to have some of that probability left, even if the stock is increasing over the next 1 to 3 years. The fourth risk that's defined on each slide will be the risk of fishery decline. And of course, there's no risk of going below 0. So that's 0 in this case. And the final is the risk of exceeding our F43 reference point or our reference SPR. And again, that's 0 because in this particular projection, there is no fishing. So now I'm going to move from the no fishing projection into the status quo minus 10%. You see, now we have risks associated with all of those different metrics. We have a 10% chance of stock decline over 1 year, 11% over 3 years. And I won't read those all off, but as I move through these, you'll be able to see those risks increase as the yields increase. The status quo minus 10% would put us at a coast-wide TCEY of 26.75 million pounds and an SPR of 54%. You can also see that the stock trajectory, although it's still likely to increase over this time period, has flattened substantially from the no fishing projection. At the status quo, which would correspond to a TCEY, a coast-wide TCEY of just under 30 million pounds and an SPR of 51%, again, you can see the risks go up somewhat, and the stock trajectory over the next 3 years flattens a bit further. Moving then up to the status quo plus 10%, the coast-wide TCEY would be just under 33 million pounds, and the SPR would be 48%. Now you can see that the probability of spawning biomass decline through 2027 is just over 20% at 22 out of 100. So roughly a 1 out of 5 chance that the stock's going to decline. And the probability of decline over the 3-year time period is slightly higher than that at 27%. You can also see that the trajectory is nearly flat at the status quo plus 10%. Now, the next 2 reference points actually occur at the same level of harvest. So the 3-year surplus and the reference TCEY this year, out of coincidence, correspond to the same value. This would be a coast-wide TCEY of just under 39 million pounds. It's the reference SPR, so it corresponds to an SPR of 43%. And I've underlined 2 of the risks here. The second one down, the chance of spawning biomass decline through 2029, is exactly 50 out of 100, or it's a coin toss whether the stock will be above or below where we are now at the end of the 3-year time period. Similarly, for the bottom risk, the chance of exceeding our F43 reference SPR is also 50 out of 100, and that's why these 2 things line up, because those 2 probabilities are both 50 out of 100. Now, you'll note, actually, if you look closely, that the projection of spawning biomass isn't entirely flat over this 3-year period. It actually goes up slightly and then back down again. And what that illustrates is that we will have caught, by the end of 3 years, at this level of harvest, a coast-wide TCEY of 38.95 million pounds, we will have caught the entire yield from the 2016 and 2017 year classes over this time period. And we would actually project that the stock would be declining again at the end of this projection after 3 years at this level of harvest. And finally, a larger harvest corresponding to our MSY proxy of SPR of 35%. This would now be a TCEY much larger than the status quo at just under 52 million pounds. And you can see here that all of these risks are substantially increased. We now have a projection that is almost certainly going down over the 3-year time period, with the risk of spawning biomass decline over the 3-year time period being 91 out of 100, or almost certainly the stock would be declining if we went to a level of harvest this high. So provide the full decision table for comparison. I'll note that in addition to the projections that I've shown you graphically, there's also the status quo plus and minus 5%, and the MEY proxy as well, which falls in between the reference SPR and the MSY proxy of SPR equals 35%. So to summarize these projections, the recent poor recruitment and low weighted age continue, and these are what are limiting our 3-year yields. Even if we have additional strong year classes that emerge in the near future, these aren't going to be able to contribute to the spawning biomass over this time horizon, over this 3-year period. These projections already include the rapidly maturing 2016 and 17 year classes. I recall just several years ago saying similar things about the 2012 year class as it moved into the stock. As we start to exploit a year class that is this young, we have the ability to harvest them before they have fully grown and matured. And in fact, that would be what would happen at the higher levels of harvest that I've shown you in these projections. These year classes are also still relatively uncertain, yet they are comprising a large component of the projection in the next 3 years. Some risks that aren't included in the decision table include the fact that the stock is at or near historically low spawning biomass. Dr. Hicks presented our analyses on various aspects of depleted versus overfished. And I think that's really useful information, particularly to guide our long-term harvest strategy. However, it's worth remembering that this is an area of absolute spawning biomass that we've not been in before. And so there is some risk of being at a level that we've not seen in the past. We have also seen continued low catch rates in the fishery independent setline survey and the directed commercial fishery. As we have heard, these are causing challenges to the directed commercial fishery. And as we'll hear from Dr. Webster in the next presentation, we continue to have challenges in our fish design process due to these sustained low catch rates. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, the causes of this ongoing low productivity remain unknown. We don't have the ability to predict when we are going to get better or worse recruitment. And similarly, we don't understand the mechanisms behind changes in size at age. And so because of that, there's a risk associated with these factors being so important in our projections, but our ability to explain them being so limited. As the Commission has requested in the past, these next couple of tables show you the adopted TCEYs by IPHC regulatory area and coast-wide for your comparison. These go back to 2013, but prior to that, we were not unable to recreate what the TCEY would have been corresponding to the adopted mortality limits. And in this slide, it's the same adopted TCEYs, and now I've added the reference TCEY to that as well, noting that the reference has evolved over time from the blue line in the years 2013 to 2015 to an F46 and then to an F43 reference SPR over the most recent years. And so, of course, for 2026, we have a reference TCEY that's listed there, but we have no adopted TCEYs yet at this stage. So that concludes this presentation. The recommendations are to note this paper associated with the presentation. If there are additional harvest decision table alternatives that would be that could be made available for evaluation at IM101, IM102, I could produce those on request to the Commission, and then to request any detailed mortality projections for 2026 also for evaluation at IM102. Noting, of course, that as we have done in the past, detailed projections will include revised non-directed discard estimates. When we receive those in early January, we will update all of these projections to include that information. And at that point, we could provide detailed projections, including catch sharing plans and other area-specific information. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Commissioners, any questions? Bob?
Yeah, John, I'll defer on this. I wanted to comment on Buck's comment before we broke. I wasn't able to jump in and raise my hand fast enough there on his comments. But so if there's comments on Dr. Stewart's presentation here, I think that should go first. But I have a comment on Buck's observation.
Okay. We'll circle back. Let's see if there are any questions for Dr. Stewart. Neil?
Thanks, John, and thanks, Dr. Stewart, for the presentation. I guess I think we've seen this before, but maybe it's more noticeable this year or not. Some of the metrics in the risk table are really similar across all of the TCEY options. I noticed in particular the percent chances of being less than 30 and less than 20 over really all the time frames. And I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more about any insights regarding why those are so flat.
Yes, thanks for the question. I can't speak to that. So I believe you're referring in particular to the central block of the decision table, and in particular, the chance of being below 30%. That would be the top row of that section. And just to orient for people that are having a hard time, and I'm actually having a hard time reading it on my screen as well, those probabilities range from 24 out of 100 to 27 out of 100 across the whole range of alternatives in this table. So as you note, that is relatively insensitive to management choice. And the short explanation is that although there isn't a high probability that we are below that reference point, if we are below that reference point, we're going to be there regardless of what we do over the next 3 years. So even this short-term projection, even without fishing, we will be in a 1 year projection, we will still be below that B30% reference point. Looking farther down that table to 3 years out, you can see those probabilities become somewhat more responsive. The zero fishing, the probability of being below our 30% reference points with no fishing has dropped to 5% over 3 years, but it remains the same at the end of the time period at the overfishing limit, or the MSY proxy of SPR 35%.
Okay, thank you.
John, you want me to make step in here? John?
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Okay. So we heard a comment from Buckalkitis before we broke on its concerns with Area 4. And I share, and others that fish out there share Buck's concern. Just the bottom line out there, the fleet's only been able to take 22% of their allotted quota in 4 Bravo, and maybe 30% in 4C, D, and E. And with regards to 4 Bravo, there may be a lot of fish on the Bering Sea flats, as there have always been, but they're not sifting into Davidson Bank area and 4A and migrating back out into 4B and backfilling whatever we've been catching at a probably a much lesser rate than we've anticipated in the last 10 years. When you can only catch 22% of what we're saying is available, these areas are starting to move into economic extinction, even though our scientists are saying the overall resources, we're not depleted, we're not overfished. But in the case of the Bering Sea and 4 Bravo, I think you have a different opinion out there for the user group out there of what they're seeing and their concerns. There was a 4% rise in the trawl survey out in the Bering Sea this year, but that's still at a very low level. It's so low that the Amendment 80 fleet is still at their lowest bycatch level. And even at that, the bycatch is what? 2/3 greater than the domestic directed catch. So we gotta listen to, I think the public from that area is going to be speaking fairly loud at the annual meeting about their concern in Area 4, 4A included. And I just wanted to alert the commissioners that there is a concern that area is probably needs some aggressive conservation action by us. Those are my comments, John.
Thanks, Bob. Hey, David, I think that might bring us to fish design.
Great, thank you very much, Chair. And so, yes, we move on to agenda item 8.1 specifically, and this is paper 13 Rev 1 that's going to be presented by Dr. Webster. So we have the PowerPoint for 13 Rev 1, please.
Good afternoon. I'll be presenting a look at this, in particular, FIS design options for 2026 and somewhat beyond. Small amount of background. The FIS, as you know, is our most important source of data on Pacific halibut. It's the data that provides our indices, density and abundance, which we use to estimate trends, stock distribution, and as input to the assessment. We get biological data for the assessment, and we've had an annual FIS since 1993. Expansions in the early years of the FIS and also in the previous decade. Full FIS grid comprises 1,890 stations on a 10 by 10 nautical mile grid from San Francisco Bay out to the Western Aleutians and the EEZ boundary with Russia on the shelf edge. And it is supplemented by data from agency troll surveys in the Bering Sea. This has been discussed earlier today already, but we have a series of objectives and corresponding design layers. The primary objective being sampling for assessment and stock distribution estimation. Secondary objective, cost effectiveness without compromising the scientific integrity of the design. And then tertiary objective, minimizing removals, testing others. Background on some recent designs. In 2020, following the expansion, a rationalized FIS design was approved, which featured random sampling of stations with core areas of 2B, 2C, 3A, and 3B. Sampling of blocks of stations elsewhere, prioritized to maintain precise estimates and minimize the chance of bias. And but due to COVID-19, the FIS was reduced to sampling in the core areas. So that was an unexpected reduction in the footprint of the FIS. In 21 to 22, the proposed design was implemented largely as planned, with Western 4B not sampled due to lack of viable bids. And in the recent years, we've had reduced designs implemented in order to lower costs to meet that secondary objective. So we've had little sampling outside of the core areas in 2023, with no sampling in 4A, 4B, or 4CDE. In 2024, we had further reductions in 3A and 3B, and some sampling in 4CDE, shelf edge. 2025, we had sampling in 3A, 3B, which complemented the areas that we'd sampled in the most recent years. And sampling, we sampled higher density parts of 2A and 4A and 4B for the first time since 2022, noting that it was a very small amount of sampling in 2A in 2023. This map shows each FIS station color-coded by its year, most recent year of sampling. So the brighter colors, the yellow, sampled in 2025 effectively, and orange 2024, the darker orange 23, getting into the purple colors in 2022, and the darkest color for stations that have not been sampled since 2021 or earlier. So you get a sense of how much coverage we've had in 1 year or in the last 2 years. In the last 3 years, we've sampled almost the entirety of the core of the stock from 2B to 3B, with a few gaps in 3A. But outside of the core, we've had some areas that haven't been sampled for quite some time. This was the implemented 2025 design. It's similar to the map that Kayla showed this morning. We're focusing on the orange stations being those that were sampled and effective, the ones that are used for modeling that I presented earlier. We had some sample stations that were planned initially, but either unsampled or ineffective. A number of those stations were resampled elsewhere in 4A and 4B, and the Bering Sea Troll, and then the purple stations were other stations that were planned for. So moving ahead to next to coming years. So in the last previous couple of years, we discussed a base block design with commissioners, was evaluated for commissioner consideration for a subsequent 3-year period, prioritized some annual sampling in each biological region in order to have data in each region for stock assessment. Ensures that all charter regions, FIST charter regions in the core of the stock, 2B, 2C, 3A, and 3B, are sampled over a 3-year period. And coverage in other areas is prioritized, again, to minimize bias potential and maintain precise estimates. In the sample blocks, charter regions in the core would be rotated over time. The base block design is considered the optimal long-term FIST design in terms of balancing scientific needs and cost effectiveness, and we refer to it as option 1. This is what the base block design looks like for 2026, 27, and 28. So you can look at this more closely, but I'll quickly go over the key features of this. In the core of the stock, we're rotating areas so that, for example, in 3A, this is the areas we charter regions we sample in 2026 are not sampled in 27, but then sampled again in 2028. And 3B, with an odd number of charter regions, we sample 2 per year, with all charter regions sampled over a 3-year period, and similar things going on in 2B and 2C. Elsewhere, we're prioritizing, recognizing that these areas are outside of the core of the stock are more costly to sample. We're prioritizing based on mix of cost effectiveness and scientific need, with the densest part of 4B proposed for 2026, the western part of 4B for 2027. It hasn't been sampled since 2019, and likewise in 2A and 4A, with rotation of sampling depending on our priorities. Goal of sampling almost all of the stock over a relatively short time frame. Now, projected costs for the 2026 design options, including option 1, which you've just seen, is the base block design for 2026, were estimated with a number of assumptions. Designs were optimized for number of skates, with 4, 6, or 8 skates hits used depending on projected catch rates and bait costs. Sometimes, particularly in regions of higher density, we project greater revenue from 8 skates, whereas in areas of lower density and greater cost, 4 skates is more cost effective. Pacific halibut price is projected to decline by 10% from 2025 values, noting we had a approximate 30% increase from 2024. So the commissioners, you might recall at the work meeting, we had a halfway decline of 15%, and this is a little less pessimistic than that. Pacific halibut landings were declined by 5% from 2025 values. And the price of chum salmon baits increases to $2.50 per pound from $1.65 per pound in 2025. So those are the key assumptions. The revenue projections include the $513,000 US voluntary contribution from the United States to support the 2026. So here's option 1 again, the base block design. One thing I neglected to note earlier, that is as part of 4B, we have 15 stations that we're designating as optional. Although they're included in the cost and revenue projections, those are stations that have been challenging to fish in recent years, and we did not fish them in 2025 for logistical reasons. Those stations somewhere elsewhere within the region. So we'd like to get those stations fished, but in order to encourage bids, not deter bidders, and not in regulatory area 4B, we're making those stations optional. For the base block design, we've got a projected net revenue of negative $1,155,000 US, and that includes projected income of $2,345,000, and expenses of 3.5 million. And because that is a substantial operating loss, would require additional supplementary additions. The voluntary contribution we've already secured. We developed an alternative design with a more feasible projected net operating loss close to $500,000, with the revenue again supplemented by that voluntary contribution. And we call this the supplemented reduced loss design. And it differs from option 1 as follows, and it's option 2. It replaces one revenue negative charter region in regulatory area 2B with 2 regions projected to be revenue positive. Adds one revenue positive region to 2C. Places 3 high cost regions in 3A with 2 regions that ensure projected overall losses are maintained close to $0.5 million. So they're regions that are not necessarily revenue positive, but their losses are less than the regions that they're replacing. And there's one fewer charter region in IPHC regulatory area 3B. It looks like this, and overall, the number of stations is very similar to the base block design. It's just the locations of those stations have been changed. And so this is kind of a mix between the scientific priorities that's emphasized in the base block design primarily, and the secondary priority of objective of cost effectiveness. So overall, we have a similar footprint in terms of coverage, but some of the areas are areas we sampled more recently. In 3A, this includes a couple of areas that we sampled already in 2025, because those are projected to lose us less money, and adding a swap of area in 2B and adding area in 2C. And we'll see that the 2 designs side by side in a coming slide. So in terms of more of a breakdown of income and expense comparison, option 1, overall the income is projected, as I mentioned, to be $2.345 million. Option 2, where we're prioritizing areas of higher catch rates, their income is projected to be $3.134 million. In terms of expenses, $3.5 million, as I mentioned, for the base block design, and $3.636 million for option 2, the supplemented reduced loss design. So slightly higher expenses for the second design, but much higher income as well. So with net revenue for option 1, the base block design at $1.155 million, and for the supplemented reduced loss design, it's designed to have a net loss of close to $500,000, projected to be $502,000. And so, as I mentioned, the supplemented reduced loss design, similar number of stations to the base block design. It prioritizes some regions that have been fished recently over others that were included in the base block design because they lacked recent sampling. It ensures, that helps ensure the cost effectiveness of the design. It does reduce coverage in region 2 over 2025 to 2026, which does increase the chance of bias in estimates for that region in particular. Nevertheless, option 2 represents substantial improvement in coverage of the design implemented in 2025 and complements the 2025 design by including 7 charter regions not sampled this year, 2 each in 2B and 2C, 1 each in 3A and 3B, and 1 in 4A. Compared with 24 and 25, this design will result in more representative biological data, more precise indices of abundance, stock distribution, and a stock assessment model that is ultimately less reliant on commercial data. Here are the 2 designs side by side to make it more easy, to make it easier for you to see where the differences lie. And probably the one that's most striking is 3A, where this big hole here exists in the base block. We sampled those 2 regions in 2025. Those are also projected to be the designs that are regions that are most cost effective. And so this design adds the back end while maintaining one of the regions that was a higher priority but less cost effective. as well, but moving to other regions. We have the Ketchikan region added back to 2C, and we have a couple of regions, Charlotte and St. James, added to 2B, and Goose Island removed to 2B. The rest of the design, and one region removed from 3B. I'll just leave that up for a few seconds so you can digest that. So as well as those two designs, it was a step-by-step process we took from getting from the base block design to the supplementary reduced loss design in order to get that approximate $500,000 loss. And these are essentially the steps that we went through, the areas that were added or removed, the changes that were made to the base block design to get to the supplementary reduced loss design. And these could be considered as modular add-ons to the modular changes to the supplementary reduced loss design that would improve change coverage to get something progressively closer to the base block design if that was desired. And so options 1 and 2 here at the top of the table, base block supplementary reduced loss and the values that you've seen previously. Benefit rationale, the base block designers are optimal long-term design, but supplementary reduced loss design is financially viable using reserve funds to cover the loss presently. And so these are the changes that will be made to the supplementary reduced loss design. We've labeled them as options for ease of reference. And so, for example, first one, add SEMITI to 3B. So it has improved coverage. This is an area we haven't sampled since 2023. So it's a relatively high priority for us. That would lead to expenses increasing by $219,000 additional expenses from sampling that. So you see the parentheses, that means basically an increase in the net loss due to increased expenses, but we'd get some income offsetting that projected to be $70,000, leading to a projected change of net revenue of a decrease of $150,000. And so that's how you can interpret all of these. And option 4 is not a straight addition, it's a replacement. So the net number of regions, charter regions, does not change in 3A, but we're switching Prince William Sound, a more cost-effective region, with Gore Point, a higher priority region for the sample since 2023. So expenses are actually projected to improve. This Gore Point is less costly to sample in terms of expenses, but the revenue would decline, leading to a net decrease in net revenue of $64,000. So I won't go through each of these step by step, but we can refer to them as if there's commissioner interest in any of these particular options. And for reference, this is a map showing the charter regions locations. So table and find whether different regions are located to see what is being added or what is being replaced. We've also considered a second set of modular add-ons. So these are all additional to either option 1 or option 2, not either option. But there may be desire for some of these to fill in gaps in coverage that may take a higher priority for different reasons. I will step through some of these. This includes 4CDE, which is not in either option 1 or option 2, and it has 3 components: the southern stations, the central stations, and the northern stations. They've last been sampled from 2021 to 2024, and also, unlike the previous design options, also the next year in which they are proposed for sample. So they're all part of almost all part of a future design plan that they could be brought forward to the commission projects. And most of these are relatively expensive regions to sample. They would have high expenses and relatively low revenue to the other regions. We have R2 and Western 4B, which is next proposed for sampling in 2027. This would bring it forward 1 year if it was selected. It has a change in expenses, additional expenses of $242,000 and relatively low revenue projections. But noting we have not sampled R2 since 2019, so it is a relatively high priority region for sampling. 2A, we've included here because we do not have stations planned in 2A, and we know that this is an important area for many of our many parties of interest, the commissioners. And so we have some options here. One is to add the highest density stations in 2A, which would be a net cost of $268,000. That's next projected proposed for sampling for 2028. We could repeat the 2A design from 2025. If, for example, you're interested in seeing that design implemented again in possibly a year without the potential for a comparison with a year with some hypoxic regions in the area every year, which may it's typical. Probably know what's going to happen in 2026. Or add the medium density stations in 2A, which is the one we got proposed for 2027 because they have not been sampled since 2017 and 2018. And so you know where these options are, except for 15B, which is the option we did in 2025. So you can reference the 2025 maps for that. We have, okay. My apologies, there's a missing map here. It's in the presentation, but it is in the accompanying document, and maybe I had it as an extra slide that isn't showing up, but it's in the document, and it shows the charter region, the regions are represented by these stations, color coded for easy reference. It's the presentation. Thank you for questions and discussion.
Thanks, Ray. Neil?
That's actually an old hand.
Oh, okay.
There are others, you can go to them. Thanks.
Not seeing any others, but I'll start with the question. So, Ray, I'm thinking about the data from this year showing a decline throughout Region 2 and the proposal here not to have any sampling in 2A next year. And of course, we didn't have any in 2A last year. So if we were to go with the supplemental reduced loss design, would you anticipate that next year you would be proposing some sampling in 2A?
In 2027, that's correct. Yes, we have. We go back to this slide. So here's the 2027 base block design in upper right, which may be modified based on depending on what we sample this year. But we do have stations proposed in 2A in both Washington and Oregon in Northern California in 2027. And those stations are prioritized because they have not been sampled by 2020.
Well, I realize that's the case for the base block design, but I guess I'm maybe not optimistic that we would be able to afford the base block design next year. So if we're doing something approximating what you're calling a supplemental reduced loss design next year, that's where I was wondering if you would anticipate that would include sampling in 2A.
So that would be I imagine would depend on your priorities. We don't have sampling proposed in 2A, partly because it is a relatively small contribution to the overall stock, not just coastwide, but in Region 2 itself. And so its influence on the trends in that region and our understanding of information that faces the stock assessment is less important from that perspective. We understand there are other reasons why it's a priority for maybe a priority for sampling, but So that's why it's not proposed to be sampled every single year. So whether we pick the base block design or the supplementary reduced loss design doesn't have an impact on that from a scientific perspective. But if we look at these options here, which are can't project the costs for 2027 necessarily in the picture, but it gives you an idea of the relative costs of the different options. And really, we know 15B, which is a repeat of last year. 15A and 16 are complementary options. They each fish different stations. They're not overlapping. And so the highest density stations, we've got a projected loss of 268,000. And these medium density stations, 295,000. They're comparable losses. So it depends on commissioner priorities, which ones we wanted to sample, or if we could include stations from both components as well. That's something that I think is worthy of discussion.
Okay, fair enough. And clearly we don't need to resolve that now for 2027. Bob.
Yes, Ray, could you put the slide up that shows the costs for your second, option 2? So the 502,000 projected net revenue of minus 502,000. You've added in the U.S. Extra gift to get.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct, Commissioner Elvison. That contribution was earmarked for the sampling in 4B, part of 4A, and the charter region in 3B. And so that allowed us, that with prices and other just the projection, gave us some freedom to add some other charter regions to the design as well, and still maintain that 502,000 loss.
Is the cost for, I think in 27 you have part of Western 4B. Is the cost there similar to what is projected in currently what you have in both these options in 4B? Would that be A2?
That's option 14, and I think that's in the ballpark. It's fewer stations than we're planning to do in 4B this 2026. So, but I think that I don't have it in front of me, but I think the cost of 4B is higher than the net loss for 4B is higher than that for 2026.
Okay. Thank you.
Peter?
Thanks, Ray. This might be more directed to Dr. Wilson. Last year, I believe we had, when we budgeted to do the FIS, it was for minus 900,000, and some of that was going to be coming out of the general fund. And so what we have proposed here is, depending on which way we go, if we went to the base block, that would be higher. If we went to the reduced, I can't remember what it's called, supplemental, that's minus 500,000. I'm just curious as to where our position has changed. Like, why are we being more conservative in terms of last year? We were kind of more comfortable to go around minus 900,000, because we had this extra fund in the general fund. Here we're looking probably a little bit less if we're looking at the supplemental. So hope you grab that.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to take that. A couple of reasons. So that negative 900,000 approved budget for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey for Fund 40 for last fiscal year was taking a few things into consideration that changed substantially throughout the current year. And those were primarily around fish prices We have now in these new figures adjusted that fish price, and the team will be able to sort of give a number in terms of what the calculations are. Can you just quickly rattle off what the coastwide fish price was in the simulations for these numbers for 2026?
Well, for 2026 projections, we used 2025's coastwide. The average coastwide price in 2025 was $8.18, and we planned for 2026 for a 10% decrease.
So, okay. So we have been a little bit more conservative again, but at the same time, last year we knew that we had, I think it was $312,000 at the time of that budget from the US. We weren't budgeting in the Canadian supplementary contribution or voluntary contribution at that time. For the current year, we have factored in that US voluntary contribution. And in addition to that, we had a balance sheet for Fund 40 at the end of the last fiscal year is $712,000. So noting that we have the aspirational goal of trying to build a reserve for the FIS of around $2 million, I'd certainly like to put that full 712 to go towards that reserve, but at the same time, noting that we have been a little bit more precautionary with our fish price estimates for the upcoming year, I think it would be a safe bet to go negative for this option 2 of around $500,000. That is in essence going at the same negative estimation as last year, noting that we received the 513 from the US. So we are budgeting more or less for $1 million negative. We take into consideration we're receiving $500,000 from the US. It's just one of those approximations or guesstimations, I think, in terms of the level of risk that we'd be find acceptable to take for 2026. I think you could be more conservative, you could be less conservative. We have built up a reserve in the general fund as well. And as of the end of last fiscal year, that sits at $3.4 million. And so we could certainly use some of that. There's just risk associated with it. And I would, at this point, be comfortable with putting a budget together of negative $500,000. It's really your appetite for risk that you'd need to consider. I know that's not a crystal clear answer, but it's yeah.
Accounting for the US.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
And so that's significant, and it makes a big difference. Oh, can you hear me now?
We can now, yes.
How about now?
Broke up a little bit. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. That helps quite a bit. I mean, the U.S. money not being accounted for last year, and now it's being accounted for. That makes a significant difference. I was just, I know we were kind of over our aspirational goal within the general fund, and so we had thought that it was important to get this survey as close as possible to the base block design. And so, yeah, I mean, we saw it this year that, when you're modeling, the farther you get away from what's happened or the last time it was sampled, things run astray over time. So just that's what's running through my mind.
Yeah, points well taken, Peter. Any other questions for Ray? Mark, I don't want to put you on the spot, but does Canada anticipate being able to provide any supplemental funding this year that could cover one or more of the intermediate options from Appendix A?
So like yourselves, I mean, we benefit from US large S, so to speak, at the end of your fiscal year, which is now past. We approach ours the end of March, and we'd hope to be able to do a voluntary contribution ourselves, as we've done for the last couple of years. I can't predict that at this point in time, but we're certainly hoping for that and agitating for that. And we'll see where we land. Hopefully we have better news come January.
Yeah,
a little
fair
bit
enough.
more
Thank
line
you
of
for
sight
that.
over the horizon. Yeah.
Okay. And then Ray or David, if the commissioners were interested in adding on one or more of those modular changes, give us a sense of time frame for Secretariat's planning purposes. When would you need a decision on that?
So I'm going to pass in a moment to Kayla, but just very quickly, it would be highly beneficial, I think, as you were suggesting, to agree to at least option 2 in this case. That way we could get those wheels in motion. If you were to add on an additional charter region or make another modification, I'm going to pass to Kayla to respond in terms of operational elements that she would need to tick off on. So over to you, Kayla.
Yes, thank you. So the initial tender specification call for tender bids will be published right before the holidays, so mid to late December. And in a perfect world, we would have a relatively solid idea at that point in time when we're publishing those tender specifications. Noting that we generally leave those tender bids open through a few days after the annual meeting. So generally we're looking at like the first few days of February that we're closing that call for bids. So I would say to have an idea by that time frame. So relatively around the annual meeting, if not a few days afterwards. And once we close the initial call for bids, our goal is usually within the month of February to make decisions on vessel assignments. So certainly once we're moving past February, things get very challenging to add more work.
Yeah, fair enough. And I acknowledge that we have pushed your comfort zone on that more than once. So points taken about your planning horizon. All right. Well, commissioners, I guess what I would propose is that we give the Secretariat the nod for the supplemental reduced loss design at present, and that we consider more whether we might want to do one of these modular changes, one or more of the modular changes, and perhaps stomach a bit more of a projected loss this year, with the idea of making a decision on any such additional increments at or about the time of the annual meeting. So I'll just put that on the table and see if there are any reactions to it.
I think that's a good plan of attack.
Are you okay with that? Yeah, I'll take that for acquiescence, I guess.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay. With that then, Chair, I think I could just quickly see if there is any public comment on agenda items 7 and 8. Don't see any. Nope. So we can move on to agenda item 9. And so this is the biological and ecosystem science research project updates, and Dr. Flanis is going to present that material. So if Dr. Flanis be made a presenter and we jump into his presentation. Thank you very much. So this is for paper 14. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Good afternoon, commissioners. I'll be presenting a report on updates on research activities in the biological and ecosystem science program. This is going to be a relatively short presentation. So for the sake of time, we're only going to be presenting updates in 3 selected research areas out of the 5 that are contemplated in the research and monitoring program. And I will highlight those research activities that have provided direct inputs into the stock assessment, namely our recent work on population structure, on our continued monitoring of the sex ratio of the directed fishery landings, and finally revised female maturity schedules. So on the first of the three research areas I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to be focusing on presenting you the final results on our efforts to delineate a fine-scale stock structure of Pacific halibut. The rationale for these studies, as you will recall, is whether we need to determine the need for separate assessments for certain components of the stock, and whether potential revisions of structure of future stock assessments should be taken into consideration. In previous presentations, we've provided a summary of the work that is the work that has been done so far, which has had as its objective to resolve the genetic structure of the Pacific halibut stock in IPHC conventional waters. The approach that we use is low coverage whole genome resequencing, which is a method that allows to screen genomic variation at a very high resolution. The data that I'll be providing today is really the final analysis of data that has incorporated additional 185 winter collected samples to the data set. So this final data set consists in the sequencing of 731 individuals, about 60 individuals per collection. That means 6 individuals per geographic area of those 5 highlighted here in those orange boxes, and in the different years when the samples were collected. The results from this sequencing efforts resulted in the identification of 3.7 million single nucleotide polymorphisms that have been used to conduct the downstream analysis. So this analysis on population structure that I'm showing here represent first what you see here in this diagram is the principal components analysis of basically individual samples colored according to their geographic area, and showing the 95% confidence ellipsis around them. So basically what you see here is there's a complete overlap of the different geographic groups. Additional analysis that incorporate unsupervised clustering, additional tests for the presence of discrete groups have really provided no additional information. So the conclusion of this studies is that no discrete genetic groups have been detected among the 5 large geographic areas that were covered. Also, we conducted assignment testing, basically asking the question whether we can assign individuals back to the population where they were sampled from. And the conclusion of those studies is that there's a very low probability of assignment. So we calculated about a 35% assignment accuracy, which is fairly low. Just for reference, salmonid species have more than 90% assignment accuracy in their genetic assignment testing. So in conclusion, we have improved the quality of our data set by increasing and balancing sample sizes among the geographic areas studied. Even with the high resolution genomic method that is used, we cannot identify discrete genetic groups among the population. There is a low probability of accurately assigning individuals back to the location in which they were sampled. And finally, these results are consistent with the single genetic group in IPHC conventional waters and support current IPHC assessment practices. That is, that the Pacific halibut population is modeled as a single coastwide stock. So moving to the next research area, and that's the research area of reproduction. Here we focus on particularly on 2 major aspects. And one is now what's moved into a monitoring assessment of the sex ratio of the commercial landings. But more recently, we've also started looking at revising the maturity schedules using histology-based criteria. What I'll be presenting you today are the results from the last 3 years of sample collections for histological assessments that were started in 2022 and continued until 2024. In fact, those collections have continued until 2025, but those data have not been analyzed yet. So of those 3 years, from 2022 to 2024, we collected more than 3,000 maturity samples from different biological regions. And in this map, you can see color-coded the different locations where samples were collected in 2022 in red, in 2023 in blue, and in 2024 in green. You will note that only areas, biological regions 2 and biological regions 3 contain samples in all 3 years sampled. Biological region 4 was only sampled in 2022 and 2024, and biological region 4B was only sampled in 2022 with a relatively small sample size, 51 individuals. But the overall sample size is quite significant, over 3,000 samples. These are the ones that we use to calculate the histology-based maturity ogives by biological region, by combining all 3 years of data. So what you see here in those 4 graphs, and I'll just go over what each of these graphs represent. On the x-axis, you have age in years, and in the y-axis, you have the proportion of mature females from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100. The dashed lines, vertical dashed lines, indicate from the left to the right the proportion of mature females at age 5, age 50. I'm sorry, at 5%, at 50%, and at 95%. So the different biological regions are highlighted here. Biological region 2 is on the top left. Biological region 3 is in the top right. Biological region 4 is on the bottom left, and biological region 4B is in the bottom right. What you can see is that if we focus particularly in the differences between biological regions 2 and 3, where most of the samples are contained and where most of the biomass of the Pacific halibut stock is, there are some interesting differences that clearly indicate that there may be some spatial differences in the maturity schedules. Namely, biological region 3, the age at maturity appears to be slightly younger than in biological region 2. One aspect that we looked at next was the temporal aspect. So what you see here is, without the confidence intervals, are the individual graphs for each of the 3 years sampled. So you'll see 2022 in the gray line, 2023 in the purple line, and 2024 in the more orange looking line. If we focus on biological region 2, again on the top left, you'll see that the maturity schedule for this region in 2022 is a little shifted to the right, whereas the most 2 recent schedules from 2022 and 2023 have actually shifted to the left. This temporal shift from 2022 to 2024 towards earlier maturation is even more evident in biological region 3. So you can see that those 3 lines are actually quite separated, and there's actually a clear transition from 2022 to 2023 to 2024 towards earlier ages at maturity. And that also is present in biological region 4, even though we only had those 2 years, 2022 and 2024. One of the things that we actually did was to calculate a coast-wide maturity ogive using the weighted regional ogives, using the average fish space-time model abundance estimates for that period from 2022 to 2024, and that's what's shown in the black line. So the black line now shows age at which the females are 50% mature of 9.8 years of age, which is somewhat younger than the age at 50% maturity that was used in the previous assessments of 11.6 years of age. I should note that the age of maturity or the revised maturity schedules that are used in this year's stock assessment in 2025, and the revised 2025 that Dr. Stewart was referring to before, is actually a calibrated, a coastwide calibrated visual ogive from data that was collected between 2002 to 2024. And I will be, for the sake of time, I'm not going to show that here. I will be showing those data during the annual meeting. So in conclusion, excuse me, I just have one more slide before the conclusions of this section. And that is that we've also started to finalize the collection of samples for fecundity. This is one of the next issues that we're going to be addressing in this research area. We collected samples starting in 2023 in our Fishery Independent Sunlight Survey. In 2023, we collected close to 300 samples in Biological Region 3. In 2024, we actually collected samples in Biological Regions 2 and 4 during the Fisheries Independent Sunlight Survey. And also in the fall, in a dedicated fecundity collection charter. In 2025, we also collected samples in the FIS, and we collected again in a separate charter late in the summer to collect particularly samples from large females, larger than 90 centimeters in foreplane. So now we have probably about 1,000 fecundity samples that we're going to be using this fall for the next fecundity estimation. So this work has not started yet, but will be beginning probably before the end of the year, or most likely at the beginning of the following year, 2026. So in conclusion, the conclusions from the histological debates, maturity estimates are that Region 3 shows a higher proportion of mature females at younger ages than other regions, and that regional maturity ogives have shifted from the left to the left from 2022 to 2024. That means at earlier ages of maturity. And the fecundity estimates, we are finalizing the collection of samples to address the question that we're intended to answer. And that is female Pacific halibut fecundity proportional to body? The last research area that I want to just provide a brief update on is fishing technology, and this is particularly in our investigation of new methods for whale avoidance or deterrence to reduce whale depredation in the longline fishery. And this is the second and final phase of this study that was funded in part by the Bycatch Reduction Engineering Program by NOAA, and involved the testing a catch protection device, a shuttle, in the presence of depredators. The specific objective was to further refine and characterize the performance of this shuttle device in the presence of toothed whales in IPHC regulatory area 4A. This field study took place out of Dutch Harbor in late spring of this year among the fishing vessels called the Oracle. It's pictured here in the picture on the bottom left, dwarfed by some larger trawler vessels. But during this 9 weeks of testing, 18 sets were fished, 15 with shuttle and control catch paired comparison, 8 of which were done in the presence of orcas, and that's evidenced by in the third picture of lips, direct evidence of whale depredation, but whales were actually present. And picture on the right, you can see some killer whales actually approaching the vessel as the gear was being hauled back. And during this study, we collected more than 80 hours of underwater footage. These were cameras that were attached to the shuttle. You can see the shuttle in the second picture from the left. And this video imaging is currently being analyzed, and also the catch data is currently being used, and we'll provide the results as soon as we get them. So this brings to the conclusion of my presentation. I'll be happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Josep. Commissioners, any questions? Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Josep. Just wondering on the whale depredation device. I recently read an article on it, and I believe it said that there was some thoughts that maybe the whales were grabbing the fish before they hit the device. So like off the long line gear, off the bottom. Was that determined or not? And yeah, just what your thoughts are around.
Thank you, Commissioner DeGree, for your question. We don't know for sure. There's still a lot of imagery to be analyzed, but we don't have direct evidence yet of whales predating on the line before they encounter the shuttle. It's possible whales were actually viewer recorded around the long line, so it is possible. Although it's also possible that one of the signals that the whales get is the sound of the hauling of the gear, and that's really when they start approaching the vessel. So that's a question that's still a little open, but it is possible. It's not ruled out that they could be depredating outside of the ship.
Okay.
Neil?
Thanks, Dr. Planas. I wondered about the ogive work, and I think we've talked about this a bit before, but I'm hoping you can refresh my memory a bit. I mean, are you surprised by how much those curves changed year over year? And then what's the feasible plan for continuing to collect data? I mean, I'm assuming if it's that changeable, we want to periodically update our understanding here. So can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Davis, for your question. Yes, I think this calls for continued sampling, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation of this section. We have collected a number of samples in all 4 biological regions in 2025 to continue monitoring possible temporal changes and spatial changes in maturity ogives. This will be crucial to determine if this is a pattern. The cause of this temporal shift in maturity schedules, that's really an important question for which we really don't have the answer right now. It could be a change in demographics. We've seen 2 year classes now coming up, being prevalent in the Fisheries Independent Saline Survey and in the fishery. That's the 2016 and 2017 year class. The 2016 class, those fish are, according to the new maturity schedule, at least 50% of those females are likely to be mature already. Of the 2017 year class, which are 8 years old today, they're probably getting close to 40% mature. So that is a really important question. I think we need more time to properly answer it.
Okay, thanks. And if I could follow up on that, I'm trying to remember Dr. Stewart's presentation earlier, and I think he said that the impact of these updated estimates was not overly dramatic, and maybe there were some other changes that had offset whatever effect this would have had on the stock assessment. I'm wondering if you, maybe between the two of you, give us a sense of like, these seem like fairly significant changes in some of the areas. Is there a scenario where it's likely they would have a larger effect on the stock assessment were we to see changes of a similar magnitude in the future? I'm just trying to get a sort of a sense of how much this could change our understanding when it comes to the stock assessment.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner DeGreaves. I'll give it a shot. And Ian can chime in if he feels inclined. What Ian is incorporating, and Dr. Stewart is incorporating in his stock assessment is the coast-wide maturity schedule. So that's the revised coast-wide calibrated visual maturity schedule. And that's what I haven't shown you for the sake of time. This data is actually incorporated into the document, but it didn't quite make it to the presentation. It will make it into the annual meeting presentation. So the slight difference that Dr. Stewart was referring to is because the previous visual maturity archive that was used in stock assessment until 2024 had an A50 value, which is the age at 50% maturity of 11.6. Now our coast-wide calibrated new visual maturity archive gives an A50 value of 11 years of age. So that difference is that relatively small difference that Dr. Stewart was referring to. So a decrease in 0.6 years of age, which does have an effect, but it's not a huge effect. And that would increase, as Dr. Stewart mentioned in his presentation, would result in an increase in our estimated spawning biomass, because now there's more mature females than we initially expected. The regional consideration, that is really an important aspect that I think, again, it requires a few more years of data to determine whether those are patterns that are stable over time, those regional differences, or not.
Okay, thank you.
Right, not seeing any other questions to us up. Thanks.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Chair. So we can move on to agenda item 10, and this is the IPHC fishery regulations that will be presented by Dr. Kutschenchak. I'll get their pronunciation soon. Over to you, Pasha.
Thank you. Can I have a presentation, please? Thank you. So this presentation provides an overview of the IPHC fishery regulations that the IPHC Secretariat, contracting parties, and other stakeholders have submitted or indicated their intent to submit for consideration during the 2025-26 regulatory process. As a reminder, the deadline for proposal submission is always 30 days prior to each meeting. And this for upcoming IPHC annual meeting is 20th of December. So this is the announcement for especially anyone interested in submitting proposal. 20th of December is the deadline. And proposals may be submitted through the IPHC fishery regulation portal, which is available on the IPHC website. The Secretariat submits 2 annual proposals. Proposal A1, Mortality and Fishery Limits, provides the framework for adopting new mortality limits, or TCYs, within the IPHC fishery regulation. And Proposal A2, Commercial Fishing Periods, which establishes the framework for adopting new commercial fishing. The mortality and fishery limits tables, along with the paragraph specifying commercial fishing period, will be drafted once the Commission adopts TCYs for each IPHC regulatory area and makes a decision on the commercial fishing period at the end. So here we provide at this time the 2 drafts that are the frameworks for those decisions, implementation of the IPHC fishery regulations. There were no changes to the frameworks in comparison to the last time. In terms of contracting party proposals, there are 2 proposals from contracting parties. Proposal P1, the annual charter management measures proposal for IPHC regulatory areas 2C and 3A. This proposal is expected in full in December. So at this time, we are just indicated that proposal P1 is expected. And we have proposal B2, a proposal establishing the daily recreational bag limit of up to 3 fish per person in IPHC regulatory area 2B, beginning on or after 1st of August each year. The IPHC regulatory area 2B flexibility provision is currently set to remain in effect through 2025, unless extended by decision of the Commission. And for convenience, the text of this proposal, proposal B2, is displayed on screen. However, I invite the proponent, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, to provide additional context and respond to the question. It is the DFO that is the proponent of this proposal. And I believe Gwen Mason is available online, and the secretary has given her the ability to turn on the microphone and answer any additional questions. Over to you, Chief.
Thanks, Basha. I actually did have one question about this, and I'm not sure if that's for Neil or Mark or maybe Gwen, but based upon Canada's contracting party report last year and a quick staff review of Canada's 2025 management notices, it doesn't appear that Canada has used the 3 fish limit in 2024 or 25. Is that accurate?
Yes, they did not use it in 2025, but perhaps it is best that the DFO provide specific.
If Gwen has the microphone, I would turn to her for details about how it's been used in previous years.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis, and thank you for your question, Commissioner Kurland. That is correct. The flexibility had not been put in place for either the 2024 or 2025 season or the 2023 season.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, unless there are any further questions, I'm happy to continue.
Yeah, thank you. Not seeing any further questions.
Okay, great. So this proposal will come back to the Commission at the end. So at the time of the interim meeting, we provide these for general discussion as needed. Moving to IPHC proposals from stakeholders. No stakeholder regulation proposal have been received for this cycle to date. But I will note that stakeholders still have the opportunity to submit proposals for consideration by the Commission at the annual meeting, with a deadline of, again, it's 25th of December, and proposals submitted after that would not be considered. On top of that, there were 2 stakeholder comments submitted, and these are provided in full in information paper 1, revision 1. Please note that the second comment was received just yesterday evening, so the paper was revised paper was published this morning. So for this comment in full, please refer to the revised version of the paper. And as a reminder, comments may be submitted up until a day before each of the IPHC session through the online IPHC stakeholder comment. And with that, I conclude my presentation. I'm happy to answer any additional questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Basha. Any other questions? Bob?
Yes, Basha. If we asked in the U.S., we have a 2 fish bag limit for sports, and if we wanted to change that to one fish. Does the commission have the ability to give an estimate what that would save in terms of poundage?
Thank you, Commissioner Albertson, for this question. All the estimates in terms of mortality associated with wide range of management measures that are put in place in Alaska, these are analyzed by Alaska Department of Fish and Game. They use the number of the surveys that are available to them, as well as the estimates of how much fish would mortality they will be, depending on the bag limits, size limits, daily closures, and based on that, they do estimate that. In terms of the regulations that apply to the recreational sector and the bag limits, please keep in mind that the IPHC fishery regulations provide the framework, and then any additional more restrictive measures maybe apply at the domestic level, but the IPHC framework is the overarching framework where the Commission made these changes, and this applies to both charter sector as well as unguided. Hope this answers your question, but provide any additional details.
Well, I'm here. I think I'm picking up that going from one fish or two fish to one fish, the commission is not involved in that, even though we set the original harvest limit.
So correct. So based on the harvest, so based on the TCY decision, and based on that, the TCY is distributed between sector according to the domestic capturing arrangement, and this is the purview of the North-Pacific Fisheries Management Council for Alaska. So based on the TCY decision, the recreational sector gets the portion of that, and then it is the charter committee that provides the recommendation for the charter measures at the North-Pacific Fisheries Management Council with the input of the analysis from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. That for the charter sector comes up with the management measures that would provide the management measure that will get the sector as close as possible to that fishery limit that is resulting from that domestic sharing arrangement. This final decision is part of what is written in the IPHC regulation, so it is subject to by the Commission. But in general, the guidance on what are the most appropriate measures given the allocation to the sector, this is based on the analysis that is provided from the domestic agencies.
Yeah, I don't remember the North Pacific Council or anybody ever allocating anything within the that two fish catch availability.
Are you referring to the unguided sector or the charter sector?
The unguided.
Unguided, yes, correct. So the unguided sector component, the two fish limit, that is part of the IPHC regulations, and that could be something that the Commission might consider.
Okay.
It's part of the IPHC regulations.
But the estimate would likely come through ADF&G personnel.
In terms of the impact, yes. In terms of the resulting mortality. We do not have access to the underlying data that would generate those mortality estimates.
Thank you.
Okay, not seeing any other questions.
Then that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Just double checking, is there any public comment? Let's see anything channel. So there's no public comment at this point, Chair. If you're willing, we can then move on to other business, agenda item 11.
Yes, please.
So agenda item 11 is just a quick update on preparations for the 102nd session of the IPHC annual meeting and the associated subsidiary bodies. So just a reminder to all those listening that the 102nd session will be held at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Bellevue, Washington, from the 19th to the 22nd of January, with the 23rd of January being held as a reserve day at this point in time. All 3 meeting pages are live, and as papers are received, they'll be populated to the website no later than 30 days prior to the commencement of each meeting. So the 20th of December is the deadline for those documents. The hotel booking is live, but as of this morning, I believe we've sold our entire room block and are seeking additional availability at the hotel. But so it's going to be a very well attended meeting in that regard. Chair, I don't have anything else unless there are any specific questions about preparations for that meeting, but all looks in well. And once we close this meeting, we will start to work on the various papers for the IM102. And just a reminder that for the conference board and the processor advisory board, as those relevant papers are published to the AM meeting page, they will also be published to those 2 subsidiary bodies. And they will be published in accordance with the same deadline for the commission. And that's all I have, Chair, on this particular item.
Okay. Not seeing any commissioner questions.
Okay. So the only item remaining, Chair, is the adoption of the report. I have just sent you the report as of the close of agenda item 10, and noting that there was no additional comment from agenda item 11, it would be up to date. So the options for adoption are several. First is to adjourn, give commissioners a chance to read through that document, and then reconvene to adopt the report. Another option is, of course, to leave that to commissioners to review overnight and send in written comments, and then adopt the correspondence tomorrow. But I'm sure there are other permutations as well, Chair, and so I'll pass to you and leave it in your hands how you'd like to proceed.
Okay, I don't have any strong preference. Mark, do you have any preference? No?
Not overly, sorry. Delay in getting to the mic.
Okay. Well, David, if it's all the same to you, I'd suggest we just break. I can't imagine that there would need to be a lot of back and forth on this. The few things that we approved were by consensus and pretty straightforward. So how about if we just all review the draft report and approve it by correspondence?
Sounds ideal. Perfect. Thank you very much, Chair.
All right. Well, in closing, I would just say thanks again to the Secretariat team for all of the presentations and papers, all the information. Personally, I think this condensed format worked well, focused on items of most interest, and relied on us to do our homework to read the other papers, which is a reasonable thing to do. I would say the U.S. looks forward to hosting our Canadian friends for this year's annual meeting the week of January 19th in Bellevue, as the Executive Director just noted. And I think that is all I have. Any other commissioners have any closing words? Okay, if not, I think we are adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you all. Thank you, Chair.